Victoria Gray exuded an air of authority wherever she went. As the CEO of Gray Tech, her presence was magnetic, her reputation built on fierce intelligence and relentless drive. She didn't merely lead, she commanded. The towering glass facade of Gray Tech's headquarters reflected her ambition, a monument to the empire she had meticulously constructed. Seeing her on the television set, Reggie was maddened. At 48, Victoria had achieved what most could only dream of: industry accolades, a coveted spot on Fortune's most influential list, and a marriage that appeared solid from the outside. Yet Victoria knew the delicate balance required to keep her world spinning. She controlled everything, and everyone, within her sphere, with an almost surgical precision. Her husband Daniel was her polished counterpart. A charismatic architect with a reputation as a visionary, he complemented her perfectly at galas and boardroom mixers. They were the picture-perfect couple, frequently photographed for glossy profiles about power and influence. Her younger brother Ethan rounded out the family dynamic. Charming and easygoing, he was the foil to Victoria's intensity. His affable nature endeared him to everyone, including her COO, Miranda. Together they formed a tight inner circle, an elite quartet that represented Gray Tech's core. But Victoria's ascent hadn't come without cost. Her need for control wasn't just a strength, it was an obsession. Every decision, every relationship was calculated. She prided herself on her ability to decipher people, peeling back layers to expose their motivations. Deceit had no place in her world. Or so she believed. The company gala that evening had been another notch on her belt of success. The venue was a dazzling showcase of modernity, much like Gray Tech itself. Yet, as she made her rounds, champagne flute in hand, a faint unease shadowed her. It wasn't the crowd, nor the speeches. It was the way Daniel and Miranda's interacted. The connection between them felt off. Daniel's attention seemed overly focused, his laughter too quick. Miranda, always professional and composed, carried an air of detachment that bordered on coldness. And Ethan? He lingered by Miranda's side, his proximity intimate in a way that struck Victoria as inappropriate. She brushed the thought aside, determined not to let paranoia tarnish the evening. Yet the whispers of doubt grew louder when she caught a glimpse of Daniel checking his phone, his expression furtive. Later that night, as Victoria stood in the sanctuary of their bedroom, the suspicion refused to dissipate. Daniel's back was to her as he lounged on their bed, scrolling through his phone with what seemed like nervous fervor. The tension in his shoulders was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria set her champagne glass on the bedside table, watching him for a long moment before speaking. "Long day?" Her voice was casual, her tone light. Daniel looked up, his smile just a shade too forced. "You know how it is. Projects piling up, late nights, endless meetings." She nodded, though the answer didn't satisfy her. Of course, it was a lie. Victoria didn't dismiss things easily. The unease nagged at her, a splinter she couldn't ignore. By the time Daniel turned out the light, she had already resolved to find the truth. Victoria had always believed that trust was a fragile thread, one that could be strengthened with time or severed with a single wrong move. Over the weeks following the gala, she saw those threads fraying around her. Every interaction, every fleeting glance, became a puzzle piece she struggled to place. Daniel's new pattern of behavior was the first crack. His usual predictability had been a comfort in their marriage. Always home by 7, their Sunday brunches at the club, their shared Netflix rituals. But lately he'd grown elusive. His calendar filled with late meetings that couldn't be traced to any known project. He avoided eye contact during their once effortless conversations, and his phone never left his side. Daniel had always valued his independence, but this felt different. He wasn't distant, he was hiding something. The second crack came with Miranda. She had been Victoria's right hand at Gray Tech for nearly a decade, her steady confidant through expansion and acquisition. Lately, however, Miranda seemed distracted, even cold. Victoria brushed it off at first. attributing it to the mounting stress of their upcoming product launch. But the subtle changes nagged at her. The quiet way Miranda avoided sharing personal updates, the slight tension in her voice when Victoria mentioned Daniel in passing, it all felt like static in a connection that had once been seamless. Then there was Ethan. Her younger brother had always been transparent, almost to a fault. He wore his emotions plainly, whether it was frustration or excitement. But now Ethan seemed guarded. He took calls in hushed tones and hesitated when she asked about his personal life. Victoria noticed how often he seemed to hover near Miranda, their interactions carrying an almost imperceptible charge. She wanted to believe it was nothing more than camaraderie, but her instincts whispered otherwise. The defining moment came one evening when Daniel returned home unusually late. He hadn't answered her texts, a rarity even during his busiest days. Victoria had been waiting in the den, a glass of wine in hand, trying to ignore the unease twisting in her stomach. When he finally walked through the door, his shirt slightly rumpled and his tie loosened, she noted the faint smell of perfume, familiar, floral, and distinctly not hers. "Rough day?" she asked casually, though her pulse quickened. Daniel hesitated before answering. "Long meeting. Everyone's on edge about the new contract." Victoria nodded, filing away the information for later. She wouldn't confront him. Not yet. "Heiser." "Heiser," she said, and did a little jerk. Her suspicions hardened into resolve the next morning when she checked his jacket pocket while he showered. A receipt caught her eye. 2 espressos from a cafe downtown. She stared at it, her mind racing. Daniel despised coffee. Miranda, on the other hand, preferred her espresso black. The pieces clicked together further when she overheard Ethan arguing on the phone. "I told you, this has to stay buried," he hissed. "She can't find out. Not now." Who was she, and what couldn't Victoria find out? The final straw came in the form of a mundane task. Reviewing Greytech's office security footage, routine after a recent cybersecurity scare, Victoria found something that made her blood run cold. Daniel and Miranda were huddled in her office late at night, their postures close, their voices indistinct. On the desk between them were confidential files. Files Victoria hadn't even shared yet. They weren't just hiding secrets, they were stealing them. The world Victoria had built began to tilt, the solid ground beneath her cracking wide open. But if her life was coming undone, she would ensure she unraveled it herself, on her terms, and with precision. Her left hand slid back to reveal terrified Victoria's face. Victoria Grey had always been a master of confrontation. In the high-stakes world of corporate maneuvering, her words were weapons, her timing surgical. But this time, the betrayal cut deeper than a hostile boardroom takeover. This wasn't just business, it was personal. And personal betrayal demanded a reckoning. The confrontation unfolded during a family dinner at Victoria's home, a tradition that had once been her sanctuary. The long oak table gleamed under the chandelier's light, the crystal glasses sparkling, and the aroma of roasted lamb filling the room. Ethan sat to her left, his usual charm dulled by an air of nervous energy. Miranda was directly across from her, wearing her polished mask of calm efficiency. Daniel, at the head of the table, swirled his wine glass absent-mindedly. Victoria observed them with an icy detachment, every detail carefully catalogued. "I've been thinking of expanding Greytech into the Asian market," Victoria began casually, breaking the comfortable hum of clinking cutlery. Her gaze swept across the table, watching for reactions. "It's a risky move, but if the patents we've been developing hold up, it could be transformative." Miranda froze mid-bite, her fork hovering in the air. Ethan shifted in his seat, looking down at his plate. Daniel raised his glass, his smile thin and practiced. "Sounds ambitious, as always," he said, his tone neutral. Victoria didn't respond immediately. Instead, she sipped her wine, savoring the moment. She could feel the tension tightening around the table like a noose. And finally, after dinner, she asked Ethan to join her in the study. The walls were lined with bookshelves, their spines whispering stories of power and strategy. The leather armchairs were arranged for intimate conversation, but this wasn't going to be one of those moments. Ethan entered hesitantly, his hands shoved into his pockets. You've been distant lately," Victoria said, her tone light but her words sharp. "Care to tell me why?" Ethan's face betrayed him instantly. I don't know what you mean." Victoria leaned back, crossing her arms. "I know about Daniel and Miranda," she said, her voice low but steady. "And I know you're involved." Ethan's head shot up, his eyes wide with panic. Victoria, it's not what you think." "Then tell me," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Because from where I stand, it looks like my husband and COO are conspiring against me, and my brother is helping them." Ethan's silence was damning. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Victoria continued, her voice rising. "I trusted you, Ethan. I trusted all of you. And this is how you repay me?" "Victoria," he stammered. "I didn't want to—" "Save it," she snapped, cutting him off. "You've made your choices, Ethan. Now it's my turn." Ethan's shoulders sagged, and for the first time in her life, Victoria saw fear in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The betrayal burned too hot, and she wasn't done. Victoria's strength had always been her ability to think several moves ahead, and now, with her trust shattered, she channeled that strength into cold, ruthless strategy. She wouldn't simply react to the betrayal, she would dismantle the conspirators with precision, leaving no room for them to recover. Over the next month, she orchestrated a plan so meticulous that it bordered on art. First, she addressed the stolen patents. Using her access to Greatex's R&D servers, Victoria planted false data within the confidential files Daniel and Miranda had siphoned. The information appeared groundbreaking on the surface, but was subtly flawed, filled with dead-end concepts and sabotaging inconsistencies. When Greatex's competitor announced the supposed innovation weeks later, the market's response was devastating. The product failed spectacularly, costing the rival company millions in sunk costs and tarnished credibility. But Victoria wasn't done. Knowing Ethan's weaknesses, she turned her attention to his financial dealings. Using forensic accountants on Greatex's payroll, she uncovered irregularities in Ethan's spending, lavish trips, unexplained wire transfers, and a suspicious investment in a tech startup linked to Miranda's personal accounts. With this evidence, Victoria froze Ethan's access to the family trust. When he called, frantic and pleading, she answered with icy detachment. "Carefully," Jamie said. "You brought this on yourself," she told him. "You gambled with your loyalty, and now you've lost." Ethan's silence on the line confirmed her suspicion. He'd never believed she would retaliate against her own blood. He didn't know her as well as he thought. Miranda was next. As COO, Miranda held substantial sway over Greatex's operations, but Victoria had always kept a firm grip on the company's reins. Now she tightened her hold. Under the guise of streamlining, she quietly reassigned Miranda's key responsibilities to more loyal executives. In parallel, Victoria launched an internal audit, citing recent cybersecurity concerns. The audit uncovered Miranda's role in leaking the false patents, along with several instances of financial misconduct. By the time Miranda was summoned to a board meeting, the evidence against her was irrefutable. "It's nothing personal," Victoria said, as security escorted Miranda out of the building. "Just business." Miranda looked at her sister. Daniel, however, required a different approach. As her husband, his betrayal was both the most personal and the most strategic. Victoria knew a public scandal would tarnish Greatex, so she opted for private destruction. Through her lawyers, she uncovered an affair Daniel had hidden years before. It was old news, but combined with his recent indiscretions, it gave her leverage. She confronted him, not in anger, but with the cold authority that had built her empire. "I could ruin you," she said, handing him a list of divorce terms. "Or you can sign these papers and walk away quietly. Your choice." The signing of the list before Lily consigned the list came as a great surprise to her. In the end, Daniel caved, his once charming facade crumbling under the weight of his defeat. When Victoria stood before Greytech's investors to address the breach of trust within her inner circle, she wore a calm, confident smile. "The individuals responsible have been removed," she said, her tone resolute. "Greytech remains stronger than ever." His words tore into her head in strident language. Her audience applauded, unaware of the wreckage she had left in her wake. Victoria sat alone in her study, the weight of her recent victories pressing down on her more heavily than she had anticipated. The evening was quiet, save for the soft hum of the house's central air and the faint ticking of an antique clock she had inherited from her parents. A glass of scotch rested untouched on the mahogany desk. She should have felt triumphant. She had dismantled the conspiracy with ruthless efficiency and restored her authority. But as she leaned back in her chair, a sense of unease began to creep in. Her phone buzzed, interrupting the stillness. The message was from an unknown number, accompanied by an image. "You think you've won," the text read, "but you miss one thing. Look closer." Victoria's blood ran cold as she opened the photo. It was her private journal, filled with pages of handwritten entries documenting her innermost thoughts, fears, and insecurities. The journal had been locked in her safe, hidden behind layers of security only she could access. Yet here it was, laid bare in front of her, photographed with perfect clarity. Panic tightened her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. She scanned the room, her eyes settling on her desk. There, faint but undeniable, was a scuff mark near the edge, a subtle trace of tampering. Someone had been in her sanctuary, breached her fortress. But who? And how? Her mind raced, cataloguing the possibilities. Miranda had the cunning, but she was already removed from the equation. Daniel lacked the skill or subtlety. Ethan? No, even his betrayal didn't match this level of audacity. The unknown nature of the threat was what unnerved her most. Whoever had done this was playing an entirely different game. One where the rules were hidden and the stakes were still unknown. Victoria reached for her secure laptop, pulling up the security feed from her home office. She scrubbed through hours of footage, her pulse quickening when she spotted a figure entering the room. The intruder wore a cap pulled low over their face, their movements methodical and deliberate. They bypassed her biometric locks with precision, breaking into the safe without hesitation, and staring at her for the first time since she'd walked into the office. The footage offered no clear view of their identity, but one detail stood out, a distinctive bracelet glinting on their wrist. Her breath caught. She had seen that bracelet before. It was Ethan's, a custom piece she'd gifted him years ago. A flood of anger surged through her, but it was quickly replaced by something deeper: dread. Ethan wasn't clever enough to orchestrate this alone. He was working with someone outside the circle she had crushed. This betrayal had layers she hadn't yet uncovered. As she sat back, a chilling realization dawned on her. She had been so focused on eliminating the obvious threats that she had missed something far more insidious. The game wasn't over. It had only shifted, and her enemies were playing from the shadows now, using her own vulnerabilities against her. Her resolve hardened. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "I need a favor," she said, her voice steady, a discreet investigation. "I want everyone in my orbit scrutinized. Every call, every transaction, every step." The response was immediate. Understood. Victoria ended the call and stared out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. She had thought her world was secure, every loose end tied, but this new threat was proof that her control was never absolute. She had built an empire on vigilance, yet she had underestimated the depths of human deceit. Taking a long sip of her scotch, she vowed silently that she would find the truth, no matter the cost, and when she did, whoever had dared to challenge her would wish they hadn't.